What does it mean that Jesus was a reputational borrower? Is there a danger in defining ourselves by what we do in the marketplace? And is living by biblical principles in the workplace more about freedom or a burden? These questions and more coming up today as we talk once again with Bruce L. Hartman. This is Weekend Connection. My name is Mike Dyes. Now, let's get connected. Morals and righteous living are not just for Sundays, but they never were. Somehow, though, we can find ourselves making moral choices on Monday that don't fit in with what we said we believed in church the day before. How should we live in the business world? And what can we learn from the life of Jesus and how he lived in the marketplace? Bruce Hartman is the founder of Gideon Advisors, a Christian advisory firm, and he's joined us today. Dr. Hartman has corporate experience in the fields of sales, finance, and operations. He was known for an ability to bring companies back from the brink of near bankruptcy and on to success. He also has advanced degrees in theology. He's the author of Jesus and Company, a book about connecting the lessons of the gospel with today's business world. First of all, welcome, Bruce Hartman. Welcome to Weekend Connection.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. It's a real pleasure and honor to be on your show.
Well, tell me, what difference would it make if we went into the business world and applied the lessons we learned on Sunday to those real-world situations on Monday?
Well, I think there'd be a significant reduction in headlines of corporate malfeasance, number one. And two, so that's obviously the most important benefit. But the second benefit is I believe that every corporation would be much more sustainable in terms of their ability to operate and provide service to their customers if they followed the lessons of Jesus.
Our guest is Bruce Hartman, businessman and author of Jesus and Company, connecting the lessons of the gospel with today's business world. Well, Bruce, how did this approach to studying Jesus and his relationship to the business world, how did that start for you? What got you thinking along these lines?
That's a great question. To me, it's building a bridge between theology and the business world and finding a connection. I really believe that it existed well before I started my more formal education. I'd worked for 30-odd years in the business world, 17 of those as a CFO. The reason why I ended my career short was I just didn't feel like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing in life. And one of the things I noticed, particularly in my studies, was the commonality between the business world and what Jesus was saying. Now, some of that obviously is influenced because that was my background. But Jesus spoke to the average person. Jesus spoke to the person who was working. Temptation is difficult. So how do we help them? So that was number one. Number two, the book is also designed to show our pastors that not all business people are Bernie Madoff. If Jesus had to do a couple of hours as a salesperson in a car dealership, when that family of four came in and told Jesus, we need to buy a car from you, Jesus is not going to sell a family of four a Mustang. He's going to sell them something that satisfies the family's needs, whether it's a minivan or an SUV or something that takes care of the family. So if you are a salesman and you want to have great long-term reputations, the best way to do it is to do it the way Jesus would do it.
Well, that sounds like something that could get an employee in some situations in trouble. Hey, I wanted you to sell this car, and you sold him the other one that didn't make us as much money. Do you see that people have to be willing to take those chances, don't they?
There was many times in my career where I didn't always do what my boss wanted me to do because it wasn't the right thing to do. And sure, Mike, there would be times where I would get counseled and told, maybe you do that. But over time, you develop a reputation for always putting the company's best interest first. You develop a reputation of being honest and having integrity. And when a tough situation comes up, it's you they call upon. So, sure, there are times where you have to sit uncomfortably in a chair and maybe have, in this case that we talked about, have a sales manager say, no, we want you selling more Mustangs. my response would be back, I know we need to sell more Mustangs, but that family didn't need a Mustang. You're not going to get fired for saying stuff like that. Now, if you do, be glad you did.
Because then you're probably in the wrong place, right?
Oh, yeah. So, and that's when I do a lot of counseling, Mike, with folks. The one thing I always tell them is employers are always looking for three things. They're looking for people with integrity, that are positive, and know how to do the job. Now, we can get overcomplicated about it, but that's simply what employers look for. But as an employee, what you should look for is a company that's positive, that's trustworthy, i.e. has integrity, and will allow you to be able to do your job with integrity. So if you're working in a place that's not like that, you're probably better off leaving and going someplace that does operate like that.
Our guest is Bruce Hartman, businessman and author of Jesus and Company. Well, we're talking about examples. Give us a modern-day example of somebody that comes to mind that chose to do business the right way, and you were really encouraged by those decisions.
Chick-fil-A, I respect them and I like them because they do one thing. They have values, they have beliefs, but they do live into their beliefs. They're not open on Sunday. And that's because Stuart Cathy believes that that's the Sabbath for his employees. And they follow through on it. And the thing that's interesting about that store is when you go to one of their stores, they always have the most cars in line. They always have the most people at the register. And all the employees that for the most part, all their employees are smiling, they're happy, and they're saying things to you like, have a good day. Thank you for shopping with us. And he walks his belief every day, particularly by not opening on Sundays and by having great employees. And if you go into the past, most of us have used Heinz 57 varieties of ketchup company. Henry Heinz was one of the early Christian industrialists. He was the very first company that provided free health care to his employees. He provided his employees with libraries. He provided his employees with gyms. And his employees respected him as a Christian and also as a boss. So there are great examples, whether it's Chick-fil-A or even Henry Heinz, the founder of Heinz 57, that have been great Christians and have been successful in business.
I can imagine somebody in the business world thinking that this is even more of a burden. I'm going to have to put all these principles into practice and be competing with people who aren't doing those things. Do you find, though, on the other hand, that there is a sense of freedom when you view your business as God's business and He's in control of that as well as everything else in your life?
I totally agree with you. And I do think there is freedom, but it starts with having a belief in the unseen. And, many of us, particularly those of us who have lived for a while, i.e. past the age of 30, we learn to trust ourselves. We learn to trust what we've learned. We learn to trust what we see. We learn to trust what we hear. But to have belief in Jesus and to have faith means you have to believe in the unseen. So you will, by applying Christian values, in the short term, you can complicate your life. But in the long term, it does give the freedom that you talked about to your life. In other words, you're submitting yourself to the unseen. By doing that, it makes you be more willing to take tougher stances. It makes you more willing to sell a family of four a vehicle that they really need. It makes you more willing when you see something being done wrong in your company to go to the CEO. So while it doesn't seem like it's uncomplicated, it actually is very uncomplicated. Just do the right thing.
It seems like a lot of businessmen and businesswomen really define themselves largely by what they do. You talk to somebody, and pretty soon it comes up. Oh, what's your business? What do you do? Do you see that there's a danger when we define ourselves too much by what we do in the marketplace?
Yeah, it reduces your humbleness. There's a certain arrogance that, particularly as you go further up the ladder, and it's one of the things I experienced in my career, you start believing that you are a god. or that what you do is a God. The reality is, the further you move away from a humble state of or a humble place, the more likely you are to be tempted, but also the more likely you are to fall. So I do see that where people will introduce themselves, oh, I'm the CEO or I'm the vice president, and there's a certain air about them of superiority. I also see it in pastors. I'm the pastor of a 3,000 member church, meeting somebody that's a pastor of a 49 member church. So it affects us not just in business, but throughout our lives. And we shouldn't allow what we do or how big our congregation is to define us. We should allow our ability to follow Jesus as what defines us.
Hmm. You write about Jesus as being a reputational borrower. Let's talk about that for a little while. What do you mean by a reputational borrower?
So one of the things that we all have to do in life is we all have to have credit at some point, whether you buy a house or a car, or if you're in business, you usually have to borrow money at some point. The single biggest determinant whether you can do that or not is based on your reputation. For instance, as people, we're evaluated based on our FICO scores, which I'm sure most people know about. Your FICO score is not based on how much you make. It's not based on how much you own. It's not based on your net assets. It's based on one thing, your reputation. It looks at how fast you pay your bills, how timely you pay your bills, and whether or not you've ever not paid your bills. So it's all reputational. That's number one. Now let's think about Jesus. On Palm Sunday, he's able to borrow a donkey and a colt just because he asks. Now, the thing that's for us in the 21st century is it's hard to think about first century. But a donkey and a colt was an SUV and a Mustang that was owned by this gentleman. So he was giving up two very expensive cars and modes of transportation to Jesus. So imagine yourself going into any city and sending somebody in and saying, listen, can you my boss needs a SUV and a Mustang. You know how you'd be met. But Jesus transcended that. Think about the Last Supper. The Last Supper, Jesus borrowed the upper room. So in Jerusalem, that was Passover. Every inn would have been filled up. Every room would have been taken. Yet Jesus was able to go to an individual, an innkeeper, through his disciples, and obtain a room to have his last and only committee meeting. Think about the feeding of the 5,000. He borrowed 3 fish and 5 loaves from a young boy. So and I think what Philip said that to Jesus when asked, he said that's 6 months' pay. So this boy had what Jesus needed. He was able to borrow it. So not only did the boy get his fish and loaves back, as you know, that when the baskets were gathered, there was 12 times what he gave. So this is the type of person Jesus was, but it shows us the value of our reputations, that Jesus could borrow donkeys, he could borrow rooms, and he could borrow fish and loaves to feed people, and that we should all aspire to be the same.
Hmm. Well, another term that's often used in business is team building. Was Jesus a team builder?
Yeah, he was, and he did it in such a remarkable way. When you think of the 12, even after he left and ascended to heaven, they went on, all of them, to do marvelous things, far differently than what they were doing before they met Jesus. But one of the things that I always found interesting, they were just 12 ordinary people. 2 of them, James and John, were the sons of a prosperous fisherman that Jesus took away. You had a tax collector in Matthew. So just everyday, ordinary people. He didn't pick from the educated. He didn't pick the religious elite. He picked people based on their ability to live into a future that they were capable of living into. And that's one of the great things that when I talk to people about Jesus and his team building, is avoid always looking at a person's resume. Look at 5 things. I believe Jesus would tell you the same thing. Number 1, do they have integrity? Number 2, do they listen to learn? And what I mean by that, many people listen to debate. They don't listen to learn. 3, do they get things done? with all these disciples, particularly the 11 that carried on, and then if you include Paul, there were a lot of things that they got done. Do they make other people better? And number 5, do they think things through critically?
We've been talking with Bruce Hartman, a businessman and author of Jesus and Company. Well, we've come to the end of the program. In the last minute or so, Bruce, are you optimistic about the business world and about Christians being involved and influencing others in the business world?
I am. I see, well, one, I've received a pretty broad reception, and it's really surprising, Mike, how many people come up to me privately and will have a conversation with me that you would never guess, Mike, have this deep yearning to know Jesus. So that's one thing that gives me encouragement, is that the reception to the book, but also these private conversations I have with folks. And I think the second thing is Jesus always prevails, and I'm always going to be optimistic as it relates to Jesus and his influence on us in our lives in the future and the impact he's had on our lives in the past.
Bruce L. Hartman, our guest today. His email, bhartman12345 bhartman12345
Thank you for your time, Mike.
Thank you, Bruce. My name is Mike Dines. Join us again next week for Weekend Connection.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.